In the peaceful little town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with neat rows of houses, each one painted in soft pastels or warm earth tones. Gardens bloomed with colorful flowers and children played on sidewalks under the watchful eyes of parents sipping coffee on their porches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, at least by face, and where gossip traveled faster than a car speeding down the main road. This was Sarah Collins' world, a world she had grown to love despite its quirks. Sarah was no stranger to challenges. A single mother raising 2 kids, she juggled her responsibilities like a pro. By day, she worked as an accountant at a small firm downtown, crunching numbers and balancing budgets with precision. But when evening rolled around, Sarah traded her calculator for a karate gi. For years, she had trained in martial arts not just for fitness, but also as a way to cope with the stress of everyday life. Her black belt wasn't just a symbol of skill. It represented strength, discipline, and resilience, qualities she needed more than ever after surviving a traumatic event that left deep scars on her mind. Max, her loyal German shepherd, was another source of comfort. Trained as a service dog, Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. He had been with Sarah through thick and thin, always ready to nudge her hand gently when anxiety crept in or stand protectively beside her when strangers got too close. His calm presence made crowded grocery stores bearable and quiet nights less lonely. To Sarah, Max wasn't just a helper. He was her anchor, keeping her grounded when life felt overwhelming. Willow Creek might have seemed idyllic, but beneath its polished surface lay rules and regulations enforced by the Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA prided itself on maintaining order, ensuring every lawn was mowed, every mailbox painted the same color, and every resident abiding by the community guidelines. Among these rules was a strict policy about pets. Dogs weren't allowed in certain areas like the community pool or playgrounds, unless they were certified assistance animals. Fortunately, Sarah had all the necessary paperwork proving Max's status as a legitimate service dog. She kept copies in her car, her bag, and even taped to her fridge, just in case anyone questioned him. Despite having everything in order, Sarah couldn't escape the whispers. Some neighbors complained about Max being outside the house, claiming his mere presence disrupted the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood. Others muttered behind her back, accusing her of faking his credentials to get special treatment. Though none of these accusations were based on fact, they stung nonetheless. Sarah tried to ignore them, focusing instead on providing a stable home for her children and staying out of trouble. After all, conflict wasn't something she sought. It usually found her when she least expected it. One crisp autumn morning, the air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves and freshly brewed coffee. Sarah decided to take Max for a walk before heading to work. Bundled up in a light jacket, she grabbed his leash, clipped it onto his collar, and stepped outside. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. As they strolled along the familiar path toward the park, Max trotted happily beside her, his tail wagging in rhythm with his steps. They passed by the community pool, a spot usually deserted this early in the day. Sarah often walked near it because it offered a scenic view of the water shimmering under the sunlight. Today, however, something felt different. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure approaching, a man dressed in khaki pants and a polo shirt, holding a clipboard. His name was Greg Turner, a man who fancied himself the neighborhood's unofficial enforcer. Greg took his role in the HOA very seriously, patrolling the streets in search of rule breakers. Whether it was someone parking in the wrong spot or leaving trash cans out overnight, Greg made sure everyone knew he was watching. As Greg drew closer, Sarah instinctively tightened her grip on Max's leash. She recognized him instantly, not because they were friends, but because his reputation preceded him. Over the months, she'd heard stories about how aggressively he handled disputes, often resorting to intimidation tactics to assert authority. Still, she reminded herself to stay calm. She had done nothing wrong, and Max was perfectly within his rights to accompany her wherever she went. "Excuse me," Greg called out, his voice sharp and demanding. Sarah stopped walking and turned. to face him, her expression neutral. "What are you doing here?" he asked, pointing at Max with his pen. "Dogs aren't allowed near the pool area." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain polite. "This is my service dog," she explained calmly. "He's certified, and I have documentation if you need to see it." Greg narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Certified? That doesn't mean anything," he snapped. "I've seen plenty of fake papers. How do I know you're telling the truth?" Sarah sighed inwardly, pulling out the neatly folded documents from her pocket. She handed them over without argument, hoping this would be enough to end the conversation. But Greg barely glanced at the papers before tossing them aside dismissively. "These could be forged," he said, crossing his arms. "You'll need to leave now, or there will be consequences." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, though she did her best to hide it. "I'm not breaking any rules," she replied firmly. "If you have an issue, we can discuss it rationally." But rationality wasn't part of Greg's vocabulary. Instead of backing down, he grew angrier, stepping closer until he towered over her. Max growled softly, sensing the tension radiating off his owner. It was then that Greg reached for the holster strapped to his hip, revealing the glint of a handgun. Pointing it directly at Max, he shouted, "Control your dog or I'll shoot." Time seemed to freeze. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest and her mind raced. She thought about her kids waiting for her at home, about Max lying motionless on the ground, about the chaos that would follow if Greg pulled the trigger. But fear wasn't an option. Not now. Not with so much at stake. Clenching her fists, she prepared herself for what came next. Little did Greg know, he had picked the wrong person to mess with. The tension between Sarah and Greg escalated rapidly, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Greg's voice cut through the crisp morning air, sharp and accusatory, as he continued to demand answers that Sarah had already provided. He wasn't interested in listening. His mind was made up long before he approached her. To him, Sarah was just another resident trying to bend the rules. And Max, a dog who dared to walk near the pool, was a violation of everything the HOA stood for. Sarah, however, refused to let Greg's aggression rattle her. She had faced worse situations in her life, and though her heart raced, she focused on staying calm. Her years of martial arts training taught her more than just physical techniques. It instilled discipline, patience, and mental clarity. Those lessons were invaluable now as she tried to diffuse the situation peacefully. "I've already shown you my documentation," she said evenly, her tone firm but respectful. "Max is a certified service animal. I'm not breaking any rules." But Greg wasn't satisfied. If anything, Sarah's composure seemed to infuriate him further. He sneered at her, his face twisting into an expression of disdain. "Certified? That piece of paper doesn't mean squat to me," he spat, stepping closer until he was practically towering over her. His clipboard dangled uselessly from one hand while the other hovered dangerously close to the holster strapped to his hip. The sight of it sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she tightened her grip on Max's leash, ready to shield him if necessary. Max, sensing the growing hostility, began to growl softly. It wasn't a menacing sound. He wasn't trained to attack, but rather a warning, a signal that he perceived a threat. For a service dog like Max, protecting his handler was instinctual, and Sarah appreciated his loyalty more than ever in that moment. But Greg misinterpreted the growl entirely. His eyes widened with anger, and without hesitation, he reached for his gun. The metallic click of the holster echoed loudly in the stillness of the morning. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as Greg drew the weapon and pointed it directly at Max. Time slowed to a crawl. The barrel of the gun gleamed ominously in the sunlight, and Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense. "Shut your mud up," Greg barked, his voice trembling with rage. "Or I swear I'll put him down right here." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her stomach churned with fear, not for herself but for Max. She couldn't imagine losing him, not after all they'd been through together. And yet panic wouldn't help them now. She needed to think clearly, to find a way out of this nightmare. Slowly, she raised her hand slightly in surrender. hoping to convey that she wasn't a threat. "Please," she pleaded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "He's a service dog. You don't need to do this." But Greg wasn't listening. In fact, he seemed to revel in the power he wielded with the gun. His chest puffed out as he took another step forward, waving the weapon erratically. Neighbors, who had been going about their morning routines, began to notice the commotion. Some stopped in their tracks, watching the scene unfold with wide-eyed horror. Others pulled out their phones, capturing the confrontation on video. Whispers rippled through the growing crowd, blending with the distant chirping of birds and rustling. "Leaves, what's going on?" someone shouted from behind Greg. "Is that guy pointing a gun at a dog?" another voice asked incredulously. Greg ignored them, too consumed by his own anger to care about the audience forming around him. All he could see was Sarah and Max, standing there as if daring him to pull the trigger. And maybe that's what pushed him over the edge. Maybe it was the combination of embarrassment, frustration, and misplaced authority that clouded his judgment. Whatever the reason, he didn't lower the gun. Instead, he jabbed it toward Max again, his finger dangerously, close to the trigger. "I'm serious," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. "Get rid of the dog or I'll deal with him myself." By now, the crowd had grown larger, spilling onto the sidewalk and filling the space around the pool. People whispered among themselves, some offering words of encouragement to Sarah while others urged Greg to back down. A few brave souls stepped forward, attempting to intervene. "Hey man, that's not cool," one man called out, his arms crossed defiantly. "You can't just point a gun at somebody's pet." Greg whirled around, glaring at the speaker. "Stay out of this," he snapped. "This has nothing to do with you." The comment only fueled the crowd's unease. More people began filming the incident, their phones held high as they captured every detail. One woman muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is insane. Someone call the police." Sarah heard the suggestion and silently agreed. This situation was spiraling out of control, and she knew professional intervention was needed, but even as she considered reaching for her phone, she realized she couldn't take her eyes off Greg, or the gun he still clutched tightly in his hand. Every movement he made sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through her veins. What if he fired accidentally? What if his temper got the better of him? She couldn't leave anything to chance. As Greg shifted his weight, momentarily distracted by the growing commotion behind him, Sarah seized the opportunity to assess her surroundings. Years of karate training had drilled one principle into her: mind. Awareness is key. She scanned the area quickly, noting potential obstacles and escape routes. The last thing she wanted was to escalate the situation further, but she also couldn't stand idly by while Greg threatened Max's life. Her mind raced through possible scenarios, weighing the risks and consequences of each action. Her decision came swiftly. If Greg fired, even once, she wouldn't hesitate to act. Self-defense wasn't just a skill she practiced in the dojo. It was a necessity born from experience. She had learned how to protect herself and those she loved, and today, that lesson would be put to the test. With Max standing loyally beside her, she prepared herself mentally and physically for whatever might come next. Despite the chaos swirling around her, Sarah remained outwardly composed. Her breathing steadied, her posture relaxed, and her gaze locked onto Greg's. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. She spoke again, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Put the gun down," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're making a huge mistake." For a split second, Greg hesitated. Perhaps it was the authority in her voice, or maybe it was the realization that dozens of people were recording his every move. Whatever the cause, his confidence wavered, and his grip on the gun faltered slightly. It was all the opening Sarah needed. With lightning speed, she closed the distance between them, executing a flawless disarm technique she had practiced countless times. Her movements were precise and calculated, designed to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary harm. Greg barely had time to react before the gun slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly to the pavement. Before he could recover, Sarah swept his legs out from under him with a swift kick, sending him crashing to the ground. In an instant, she pinned him down using a textbook arm lock, ensuring he couldn't fight back. The crowd erupted into gasps and cheers, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Greg lay sprawled on the concrete, sputtering in disbelief as Sarah stood over him, calm and collected. Max barked loudly, adding his voice to the chorus of shock and relief that filled the air. Though the confrontation was far from over, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She had done what she had to do to protect her dog and herself. The moment Greg hit the ground, the world around Sarah seemed to explode into chaos. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves crashing against a shore. Some people clapped, others shouted in disbelief, and a few even cheered for Sarah's quick thinking and bravery. Max stood by her side, his ears perked up and his tail wagging slightly as if he too understood that the immediate danger had passed. But Sarah didn't have time to celebrate or process what she had just done. Her focus remained razor-sharp, her body tense and ready for anything. Greg, sprawled awkwardly on the pavement, was clearly stunned, his face flushed red with embarrassment and anger as he struggled against Sarah's hold. "Get off me!" he barked, his voice laced with frustration and disbelief. "Do you know who I am? You're going to regret this." Sarah ignored his threats, keeping her grip firm but controlled. She wasn't interested in hurting him. She simply needed to ensure he couldn't cause any more harm. Years of martial arts training had taught her how to neutralize a threat without resorting to unnecessary violence. Still, adrenaline surged through her veins, making every sound around her sharper, every movement clearer. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, the rustling leaves overhead, and the frantic whispers of the growing crowd. "Is he okay?" someone asked nervously. "She took him down so fast," another marveled. A woman standing nearby stepped forward cautiously, her phone still recording the scene. "Ma'am?" she called out to Sarah, her tone cautious yet supportive. "Do you want us to call the police? That guy pulled a gun on you and your dog." Sarah nodded once, her expression calm but resolute. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "And make sure someone stays with him until they get here." As the woman dialed 911, others in the crowd began to rally around Sarah. A man approached her hesitantly, holding out his hand. "You handled that beautifully," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured him, though her heart was still pounding. "But my dog, he's the real hero here." She glanced down at Max, whose protective stance hadn't wavered throughout the entire ordeal. He looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, silently reminding her that they were a team, a partnership forged not just in loyalty, but in trust. Despite the support from the crowd, Sarah couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about defending herself or Max, it was about standing up against someone who believed he could intimidate others into submission. Greg's actions weren't just reckless, they were dangerous, and Sarah knew she had done the right thing, but knowing that didn't stop the questions from creeping into her mind. Would the police see it that way? Would Greg try to twist the story to paint himself as the victim? And what would happen to Max if things went south? Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant wail of sirens approaching the neighborhood. The sound brought a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, help was finally on the way. On the other, Sarah knew this confrontation wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the police cars pulled up, lights flashing, officers spilled out, their expressions serious as they assessed the situation. One officer immediately moved toward Greg, who was still lying on the ground under Sarah's control. Another approached Sarah, his hand resting lightly on his holster as he surveyed the scene. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Sarah released Greg slowly, stepping back to give the officer space. "This man pointed a gun at my service dog," she explained, gesturing toward Max. "He refused to listen when I showed him documentation, proving Max is certified. When he drew his weapon, I disarmed him to protect myself and my dog." The officer nodded, jotting notes on his pad. "And the gun?" he asked, glancing around. "It's over there," Sarah said, pointing to where the firearm lay on the pavement. Another officer retrieved it carefully, examining it before placing it in an evidence bag. Meanwhile, Greg scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his clothes as he launched into a tirade. "She attacked me," he exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah. "I was trying to enforce HOA rules and she flipped out. Look at me, I'm the victim here." Sarah clenched her jaw but forced herself to stay composed. Let him talk, she thought. The truth will come out soon enough. The officers separated Sarah and Greg, taking detailed statements from both parties. They also spoke with several witnesses, many of whom willingly shared the videos they had recorded on their phones. Sarah watched as the footage played back on one woman's screen, showing Greg pulling the gun and Sarah's measured response. Each frame reinforced the facts. Greg had escalated the situation unnecessarily, while Sarah had acted in self-defense and to protect Max. Throughout the questioning, Sarah answered honestly and concisely, explaining her background in martial arts and emphasizing that she only intervened after Greg threatened her dog. "I didn't want to hurt him," she told the officers. "I just wanted to stop him from doing something he'd regret." Greg, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated as the investigation unfolded. He sputtered excuses, claiming he felt intimidated by Max's presence and insisting he never intended to harm anyone. But his words carried little weight compared to the damning evidence captured on camera. Even some of his own neighbors chimed in, recounting past incidents where Greg had been overly aggressive in enforcing HOA rules. "You can't just pull a gun on people because you don't like their pets," one man said bluntly. "That's not how this works." Another neighbor added, "She showed him all the papers proving her dog is legit. He wouldn't even look at them. It's like he wanted to start trouble." As the pieces fell into place, the officer's demeanor shifted. They began treating Greg less like a concerned citizen and more like a suspect. Handcuffs clicked into place as they arrested him, reading him his rights as he protested loudly. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, struggling against the officers. "She assaulted me. You're making a huge mistake." Sarah watched silently as Greg was led away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Relief washed over her, but it was tinged with sadness. No one should have to go through something like this, especially not over a misunderstanding fueled by ignorance and arrogance. Once Greg was gone, the officers turned their attention back to Sarah. "We'll need to follow up with you later," one of them said kindly. "But based on what we've seen and heard today, it looks like you acted appropriately. Thank you for staying calm and handling the situation responsibly." Sarah nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I just want to make sure everyone understands that Max isn't just a pet. He's part of my family. He helps me every single day." The officer smiled sympathetically. "We'll make sure that message gets across, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." With the immediate crisis resolved, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to offer Sarah words of encouragement. Some hugged her, others patted Max affectionately on the head, and a few promised to attend the next HOA meeting to demand changes in how disputes were handled. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of camaraderie with her neighbors, a shared understanding that justice mattered, and that no one should wield power recklessly. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light over Willow Creek, Sarah and Max started walking home. The morning air felt lighter now, almost cleansing, as if the tension that had gripped the neighborhood had finally lifted. Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would likely be legal proceedings and media attention, but for now she allowed herself a small smile. Max nudged her hand gently, as if to remind her that they were in this together. And as she scratched behind his ears, Sarah realized something important. Sometimes standing up for yourself means fighting back, not just physically but emotionally and legally too. But most importantly, it means finding strength in community, in love, and in the unbreakable bond between a person and their dog. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah Collins. What had started as a quiet morning walk with Max quickly turned into an event that captured the attention of not just Willow Creek, but the entire surrounding area. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, drawn to its dramatic elements. A single mother defending her service dog against an armed HOA enforcer, using martial arts skills honed over years of training. The narrative resonated deeply with people, a tale of courage, resilience, and justice prevailing in the face of aggression. For Sarah, however, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside her house, microphones thrust toward her whenever she stepped onto her porch. Neighbors who once whispered behind her back now greeted her warmly, offering hugs and words of support. Some even brought baked goods or left notes thanking her for standing up to Greg Turner. While their kindness touched her heart, Sarah couldn't help but feel uneasy. She hadn't acted out of a desire for recognition. She'd done what she had to do to protect Max and herself. Fame or infamy wasn't something she sought, yet it found her all the same. Despite the chaos, Sarah remained grounded. Her children, ages 10 and 12, watched the news unfold alongside her, their faces filled with equal parts pride and concern. "Mom, are you going to jail?" her youngest asked one evening, his voice trembling. "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured him, pulling him close. "I did nothing wrong. I protected us, and that's what matters." Her eldest daughter chimed in, clutching her phone. "Everyone at school is talking about you. They think you're a superhero." Sarah chuckled softly, though the weight of the situation lingered in her mind. Being labeled a superhero wasn't accurate. It diminished the complexity of what she had faced. Yes, she had acted bravely, but bravery didn't erase fear. It didn't stop the late-night worries about legal repercussions or the lingering tension every time someone knocked on her door. Still, she appreciated her kids' admiration and tried to use the moment as a teaching opportunity. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means doing hard things," she told them. "But it also means knowing your rights and staying calm when others try to scare you. That's how we make the world better, not by fighting, but by showing respect and strength." As the media frenzy grew, so did public outrage directed at Greg Turner and the HOA. Footage of the incident circulated widely online, sparking debates about gun laws, animal rights, and the misuse of authority. Many viewers praised Sarah's composure and skill, while others criticized Greg's actions as reckless and irresponsible. Social media lit up with hashtags like Totgar Justice for Max and Lar Stand with Sarah, amplifying calls for accountability. Local news stations interviewed residents of Willow Creek, most of whom sided firmly with Sarah. One neighbor recounted how Greg had bullied her into removing holiday decorations from her yard because they violated HOA guidelines. Another shared a story about Greg threatening to tow a car parked half an inch over a driveway line. These accounts painted a troubling picture of a man obsessed with control, willing to intimidate others to assert dominance. Even members of the HOA board distanced themselves from Greg, issuing a public apology to Sarah and promising reforms. In a hastily organized meeting, they announced stricter oversight for volunteer enforcers and mandatory training sessions on conflict resolution. They also pledged to educate residents about service animals, emphasizing that pets like Max played vital roles in supporting individuals with disabilities. "We regret the distress caused to Ms. Collins and her family," read a statement released by the board. "Our community thrives on mutual respect, and we are committed to ensuring such incidents never happen again." While the apology offered some comfort, Sarah knew words alone wouldn't fix the deeper issues plaguing Willow Creek. Rules existed, for a reason, but enforcing them shouldn't come at the cost of compassion and understanding. She decided to channel her energy into advocacy work, determined to turn this painful experience into something positive. Partnering with local organizations, she began hosting workshops aimed at fostering empathy and awareness. Topics ranged from responsible pet ownership to recognizing the needs of individuals with PTSD and other invisible disabilities. At her karate studio, Sarah launched free self-defense classes for women, focusing not only on physical techniques, but also on mental preparedness. "It's not just about learning how to fight," she explained during one session. "It's about believing in yourself and knowing you have the power to stand up for what's right." Her students admired her passion and dedication, often sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Through these connections, Sarah built a network of support that extended far beyond Willow Creek. Amidst the whirlwind, Max remained her constant companion. His presence brought a sense of normalcy to their lives, grounding her when emotions ran high. Together they continued their daily walks, though Sarah kept a closer eye on her surroundings. She carried pepper spray in her pocket now, just in case, and always made sure her phone was fully charged. Old habits died hard, especially those born from trauma. Legal proceedings against Greg moved slowly, bogged down by paperwork and court dates. Charges included unlawful brandishing of a firearm, animal endangerment, and disorderly conduct. During hearings, Greg appeared defiant, blaming Sarah for provoking him and insisting he had acted in self-defense. But the evidence spoke louder than his excuses. Video footage clearly showed him drawing his weapon first and escalating the confrontation unnecessarily. Witnesses testified about his history of aggressive behavior, further undermining his credibility. Sarah attended each hearing, sitting quietly in the courtroom with Max lying at her feet. Though nervous, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Every time Greg glared at her from across the room, she met his gaze steadily, reminding herself that truth was on her side. When it was her turn to speak, she addressed the judge calmly, recounting the events of that fateful morning without embellishment. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "I don't want revenge. I want accountability. No one should live in fear of being threatened or harmed simply because they're following the law. My hope is that this case serves as a reminder of the importance of compassion, education, and responsible leadership." Her words resonated with many in the courtroom, including the judge, who ultimately ruled in her favor. Greg received probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent restraining order, preventing him from contacting Sarah or entering her neighborhood. The verdict brought a mix of relief and vindication, though Sarah knew true healing would take time. In the weeks that followed, life in Willow Creek began to settle back into its familiar rhythm. The HOA implemented new policies, and neighbors grew more mindful of each other's needs. Sarah became a symbol of resilience, inspiring others to speak up when faced with injustice. Children waved at her as she passed by with Max, calling him a hero dog. Strangers stopped her in grocery stores to thank her for setting an example of grace under pressure. Through it all, Sarah remained humble, aware that her journey was far from over. She still battled anxiety and occasional flashbacks, reminders of the trauma she had endured. But with Max by her side and a community rallying behind her, she felt stronger than ever. Challenges lay ahead, but she faced them with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. And so, amidst the beauty and complexity of Willow Creek, Sarah Collins walked forward, not as a victim, nor as a hero, but as a woman who had found her voice and used it to create change. For Sarah, the future wasn't defined by fear or regret. It was shaped by love, courage, and the unwavering bond between a person and her loyal companion. The weeks that followed the legal resolution of Sarah's confrontation with Greg brought a sense of calm to Willow Creek. But for Sarah, life felt far from ordinary. The incident had left an indelible mark on her and on the community she called home. While the immediate danger had passed, its ripple effects were still being felt in ways both big and small. For Sarah, moving forward meant finding balance between healing from the trauma of that day, embracing the newfound attention, and continuing to advocate for causes close to her heart. One of the most surprising changes was how differently people treated her. Neighbors who once whispered behind closed doors now greeted her warmly, often stopping to chat or compliment Max. Some even invited her over for coffee or dinner, eager to learn more about her story and express their support. At first, Sarah found it strange. She hadn't asked for sympathy or admiration, but over time she realized these gestures came from a genuine desire to connect. In a way, the incident had brought the neighborhood closer together, breaking down barriers and fostering a spirit of unity. Children especially adored Max, treating him like a local celebrity. On their walks, kids would run up to pet him, asking endless questions about what it meant to be a service dog. "Does he help? You cross the street? one little boy asked excitedly during one such encounter. Not exactly, Sarah replied with a smile, but he helps me feel safe when I'm scared or overwhelmed. The innocence of their curiosity reminded Sarah why advocacy work mattered so much. These children were growing up in a world where kindness and understanding could make all the difference, and if sharing her story helped them see the value of compassion, then every awkward interview or public appearance was worth it. As word of her bravery spread beyond Willow Creek, Sarah received messages of encouragement from people across the country. Veterans battling PTSD reached out to thank her for shining a light on the importance of service animals. Women grappling with abusive relationships shared stories of empowerment inspired by her actions. Even strangers dealing with HOA disputes wrote to say they felt emboldened to stand up for themselves after hearing her account. To handle the influx of attention, Sarah created a social media page dedicated to raising awareness about service animals and self-defense. She posted videos of Max performing tasks, explained the laws protecting assistance dogs, and offered tips for staying safe in difficult situations. Her posts quickly gained traction, drawing thousands of followers eager to learn from her experiences. Though managing the page added to her workload, Sarah found joy in connecting with others who understood her journey. Her karate studio became another focal point for change. Inspired by the free self-defense classes she had started shortly after the incident, Sarah expanded the program to include workshops tailored specifically for women and teens. Each session began with a brief talk about confidence and boundaries. Before diving into practical techniques, participants practiced blocking strikes, escaping grabs, and using everyday objects, like keys or pens, as improvised weapons. What you're learning isn't just about physical strength, Sarah emphasized during one class. It's about trusting your instincts and knowing you have the right to protect yourself. Many attendees credited her teachings not only with boosting their skills, but also with transforming their mindset. One young woman tearfully recounted how the lessons gave her the courage to leave an unhealthy relationship. Another thanked Sarah for helping her regain control after years of feeling powerless. Hearing these stories reinforced Sarah's belief that resilience wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, step by step. While Sarah thrived in her new role as an advocate, she remained mindful of her own healing process. The trauma of facing a loaded gun lingered, manifesting in occasional nightmares and moments of heightened anxiety. During these times, Max proved invaluable. His steady presence reminded her that she wasn't alone, offering comfort when words fell short. Therapy sessions and journaling helped too, allowing her to unpack the emotions tied to that fateful morning. Slowly but surely, she learned to let go of the fear that had once gripped her so tightly. Max, meanwhile, continued to shine as her steadfast companion. Whether they were strolling through Willow Creek or attending community events, his loyalty never wavered. He seemed to sense when Sarah needed extra reassurance, nudging her hand gently or resting his head on her lap. Their bond deepened with each passing day, a testament to the power of unconditional love. The HOA also underwent significant changes in response to the incident. Members implemented stricter guidelines for volunteers, requiring background checks, and conflict resolution training for anyone involved in enforcement duties. They partnered with local animal shelters to host educational seminars about service animals, ensuring residents understood the rights and responsibilities associated with owning pets in restricted areas. A new hotline allowed neighbors to report concerns anonymously, reducing the likelihood of future confrontations. Though some skeptics doubted whether these measures would stick, Sarah chose to remain hopeful. Change rarely happened overnight, but progress, even incremental, was worth celebrating. By participating in HOA meetings and sharing her perspective, she helped shape policies rooted in empathy rather than fear. Over time, Willow Creek evolved into a more inclusive and compassionate place, thanks in no small part to her efforts. Looking back, Sarah marveled at how much had changed since that crisp autumn morning. What began as a routine walk turned into a defining moment, not just for her but for everyone touched by her story. She had faced adversity head-on, proving that courage didn't mean being fearless. It meant acting despite fear. And in doing so, she inspired countless others to do the same. Life in Willow Creek returned to its usual rhythm, though it carried a new richness. Sarah's days were filled with purpose, teaching karate, leading workshops, advocating for service animals, and cherishing quiet moments with her family. Her evenings often ended with Max curled up beside her, his rhythmic breathing lulling her to sleep. Together they navigated the complexities of their world, finding beauty in the ordinary and strength in the extraordinary. For Sarah Collins, the journey wasn't about seeking fame or validation. It was about standing firm in her convictions, protecting those she loved, and creating a legacy of kindness and resilience. As she walked through Willow Creek, hand in paw with Max, she knew one thing for certain. The future held challenges, but it also brimmed with possibilities. And whatever came next, she would face it with grace, determination, and an unshakable belief in the power of community. In the end, Sarah's story wasn't just hers. It belonged to anyone who dared to stand up for themselves, to fight for justice, and to build a better tomorrow. And as long as there were people willing to take that first step, the world would always have room for heroes like Sarah and Max.